Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
Well, if you're here with us once again, you must be in the seats with. My name is Dave Voigt, the editor and publisher over at intheseats.ca, and I am your venerable host for this podcast on our second episode. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to like us, to subscribe to us on either YouTube, where you can see the podcast, or to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and give us a review, a 5-star rating if you can, if you want to, but if you don't, we understand. On today's episode, we're talking with R.J. City, pro wrestler and actor who appears in the documentary You Can't Kill David Arquette, which is now available on all VOD platforms from our friends at Elevation Pictures, and it tracks David Arquette's journey inside professional wrestling and his struggle to be respected by that industry. And we get to talk with RJ, who is featured in the film, and we talk about his what he does in the film and sort of how the industry of wrestling and the industry of the movies really are pretty much similar than most people tend to give it credit for. But I hope you enjoy, and we'll see you at the end. Hello. Hello, RJ.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, man. How you doing?
Wonderful.
Thanks for the time today, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh my God, of course. Thank you for having me.
Now, I mean, I guess obviously I love the movie. It is a hell of a lot of fun. And I mean, full disclosure, I am a full-blown wrestling fan, so
Good. Then this will be easy I won't have to explain it to you.
no, you can shoot. You don't have to work me. You can,
That's fine.
But I mean, I guess my first question is, and there's a line in the film that I really love. I think David says it. It's just sort of trying to figure out what wrestling is about. And I'm kind of curious, from your definition, what is wrestling about?
Wrestling to me is kind of like, I think it's like a Twilight Zone episode where it's like a hall of mirrors. It's like a fun house, and you'll really just see a distorted reflection of yourself. Wrestling is that weird kind of thing where it draws all these different kinds of people together, and you get to really present yourself. So as much as it documents wrestling and highlights different styles, and, David goes and wrestles with the luchadors and does the death matches, it's really like a canvas upon which one can paint your joys and your suffering.
And I mean, and that's kind of interesting because, and I mean, I've seen this historically just through the past of people who've had success in pro wrestling. It's them being themselves, just turning it up to 11.
Right. And I think, in the beginning of it, David dabbles with different kind of gimmicks. He wants to do a magic thing. When we wrestled, he was kind of going for this King David motif where he's on this pedestal, and it made no sense. And I remember saying to him, no one is coming here to see King David. Like, they want to see you. I've been attacking you publicly about your life and career, like everything that's real. So wrestling does that really weird thing where it takes stuff from real life and puts it into a storyline. And you're like, oh, okay, this whole thing is about me. So when I wrestled him, it's the first time he really has to wrestle as himself and deal with that, especially with his daughter and wife in the third row.
And I mean, just to dial it back a little bit, because there's something that's always kind of fascinated me about just sort of the relationship between the sport and the art of pro wrestling, because it is an art form in many ways, and also the sort of the Hollywood side of things and acting. And I mean, back in the day when I was growing up, it was Hogan, it was Andre, it was Macho Man, and I mean, there was very little marriage between the two, but now the lines are getting a little more crossed over. I'm kind of curious, how do you think the business of Hollywood and the business of pro wrestling are starting to sort of I don't want to say merge, but at least sort of a little more accepting of one another.
I think they've always been like that, but there's been a refusal on both ends to accept it and look at it. I mean, it's hard to look at Gorgeous George and not see someone who's similar to Milton Berle or Sid Caesar or Jack Benny, and guys like Jack Benny and Jerry Lewis and Merv Griffin all did like comedy wrestling matches for charity stuff, and they all understood what it was. There's this reluctance, especially amongst wrestlers, to say, what we do is show business. And I never really understood why that is, because it's blatantly not a sport. Even though it's athletic, that's totally fine. But I think, and of course, stuff with Andy Kaufman, I don't need to tell you, that was the real big time invasion of show business and wrestling, and how it can work on this third level that's almost now its own thing. It's a little mix of everything. And I've always looked at wrestling as the Muppet Show. Like, to me, it's the exact same thing. And it's great to explore it like that. And I think through this documentary, certainly my part, I was really willing, and I was like, hey, let's open this up and let's show us putting together the match. I put it together for a specific reason. It's about a struggle and a guy who really doesn't know what he's doing here, and he has to figure it out. So, like, let's lift up the curtain a little so people can see that it's the same thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I love how the film really takes care in showing sort of the respect angle that David wants to take to it all. Because, I mean, I remember watching the whole bit when he got the belt back in the day, and it's just like, oh my God, they put the belt on him. It's like, holy shit, what are they doing? But again, like you say, it's a show, and I'm kind of curious because especially during the film, we see sort of every style that he sort of experiments with, and especially the death match, which was a little bit gruesome, but
a little.
How important is the respect angle sort of on both sides of the aisle, in front of the curtain and behind the curtain?
It's important, but like anything, that respect angle can kind of be abused, especially, by older guys or people who are already there, and they can hold it over people's heads by saying, pay your dues and, learn how to respect people and blah, blah, blah. And David, I think, respects and reveres the business to a degree where in certain instances he stopped respecting himself and worrying about himself, and that certainly has its own consequences. He completely submitted to what the art form was, and I think lost himself in the process, or which I think he's done in various avenues throughout his life. And I was the first person to say, like, hey, we can make something out of this, as opposed to say, no, you have to learn and you have to be treated horribly. I was like, we can do something fun here. You need to really look at yourself and accept yourself and figure out what role you can play here.
And I mean, and that's so telling, because I mean, in many, not just professions or creative or otherwise, that's the kind of thing that often gets forgotten. Because I mean, I look at I remember seeing the deathmatch bit on the news, and it was like, okay, I can understand sort of the need and the impetus to sort of want to try something and want to get respect in something that you appreciate, but at the same time, it's like, ouch, that's a bit too far.
Well, that shows you how much he submitted himself, that he really did not think of the risks or the potential consequences, despite people like me saying, hey, that's probably not a good idea. Like, you're not really trained. And, even though he learned to wrestle and did learn how to put on a good match, it takes years. It's like doing stand-up. Just because you have one set that's good doesn't make you an amazing comedian.
Right.
You have to be consistent with it. And that takes a really long time. And when you add weapons into the mix, I mean, these are not props. Like for something that's fake, wrestling could be a lot more fake. And there's no like movie prop light tube. I don't know why there is. There really should be. A lot less people would get hurt. But David is really the definition of lead with your heart, say yes, and figure it out as you go. And that, creates some amazing moments and also some horrific moments.
Well, and I mean, so much of the sport of pro wrestling, or the art of pro wrestling, as it were, is about the dance partner, because I mean, like you say, he has been trained to put on a passable match, but at the same time, it's like you're only as good as your dance partner at the same time. If you don't have a dance partner who's going to take care of you, then something crazy can happen.
Right. As much as it seems like there's a contest between two people, it's two people relying on each other. So,
Yeah.
for example, my role was, how do we take a wrestler that everyone hates, this actor that everyone hates, and turn him into someone that everyone likes and an underdog that people now want to see wrestle?
For
And
sure.
it's like, well, I have to be a bad guy. I have to be a horrible person. And I insulted him for months on Twitter and in promos and wherever I could. And I slapped him on the red carpet. We pulled out all the stops. So people just wanted to see me get beat up. So they're automatically in his corner. So as much as it looks like it's an act of aggression, it's bizarrely an act of support.
Oh, totally. And I mean, and this is, I guess this kind of leads into my next question, just because, I mean, obviously I'm curious just about not only like sort of when you start and you learn and you start to train, because obviously there's the physical aspect of it, but then there's sort of understanding and learning the psychology of, this is how we're going to draw money, because which is at the end of the day is what you want to do.
Right. I don't think he realized at the beginning that it was so similar to what he did. And, his family, his great-grandparents were in vaudeville. And that's really what this world is. And I think when he was able to clue into that, he was like, oh, okay, then we can really do stuff here. So many times I'd have to tell him, like, remember, like, this is acting and you can act. It's, there's something weird about wrestling because wrestling is so physically unnatural. Nobody really moves like that. And certainly you're not meant to fall like that it kind of messes with your head and you forget to apply, especially when you're learning the beginning part of it, you forget to apply the emotions to it and the psychological drama of it all. So for him to clue into that, like that's when things started making sense.
For you during, like, especially the early days for you, like when did that sort of element sort of seep into your training?
Well, the training is hard because you really have to become, wrestling-wise, all the moves have to become second nature, and you know them automatically. That's why the training is so brutal. It's like fall down, get up, fall down, get up, fall down, get up, until you can do it without thinking. Then other stuff starts to creep in, and you get a little more confidence, and you're like, well, what if I do this? What if I act in pain in a certain way? Or what if I do something so that they'll boo me, and you have a little room to experiment. And I'm still experimenting. And I think the thing with wrestling is that it's addictive, but there's something about it that is never fully satisfying. Like I still can't, like watching this documentary, I still can't go, I don't think he's fully satisfied with the wrestling. There's always that, and it happens to a lot of wrestlers, that one more match hanging over your head. It's really hard to have the perfect match, and that's why people wrestle for so long. Because if you did it and it was totally satisfying, then people would have one match and retire.
Yeah. And I mean, it's because at the same time, like while you're telling a story in the ring, you're telling a different story every single time, and it's always these constant little variations and sort of subtle changes that aren't necessarily, I'm looking for the right word for this, but maybe sort of picked up on by the audience, or at least appreciated by the audience, because we can watch you wrestle once and tell one story, but at the same time, like you're making towns and you're going to different venues and you're working for different promotions and you're doing similar things, but you're doing different things at the same time. So it's not a question of I've told my one story. I'm telling variations on a theme all the way down the road.
Right. It's not like a play where if you see Phantom of the Opera, you will pretty much always see the same Phantom of the Opera every time you see it. It's more like stand-up. If you've ever seen a comedian on tour more than once, they can tell the same joke that they know works, but they'll tell it in a different way depending on the room. And certainly with wrestling, the audience is so involved in the process, and it's done for their response that they are part of the story. And if we're doing something, if I'm at a show and I'm on the mic and I'm trying to insult people and somebody yells at me, I give myself enough room and flexibility to interact with them and make that part of it. So as much as there are things that we know work, you really don't know until it happens.
For sure. I mean, I almost equate it to the traveling players that you see in Hamlet. They roll into town with the horse and buggy, and then, people tell them the show they want to see, and then they put it on. And like you say, there always has to be sort of that room for wiggle. And I love how the film really does see that, especially during the street wrestling bits, because you can tell he's easily very uncomfortable doing this, but then it's just like, fuck it, let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's another universe completely. The Mexican street wrestling is like being on another planet. I mean, they are looking at it like a dance, like you would be busking on the street, because that's exactly what it is for those people. And there's a premium on the athleticism and the smoothness and the timing of it all, and less on the emotion. So, and then that's what that culture appreciates. If they don't see a good move, like they were not connecting with David emotionally.
Yeah.
So there's all these different aspects that mean certain things to certain people. And even when we, team together in the States, a crowd in Chicago is different than a crowd in LA. Having said that, we have our own act, just like you would watch a Laurel and Hardy movie, you generally know what you're going to get. However, because of the environment we're in, we can always change it up a little, which also keeps it fun for us and keeps it, exciting and live. That's the best part, is that it was always genuine and live with him, because his whole heart was in it every time he wrestled.
Well, and I love just what you just said about changing it up, because, I mean, especially given these days in the current pandemic, I mean, you could see what, like, even the top levels did with the WWE and the Bray Wyatt character, and sort of making a match be something different as opposed to just two guys in the ring cutting promos and working physically, and sort of evolving that way. How do you think sort of the sport of pro wrestling, or the art of pro wrestling, as I've been saying, has been or can evolve going down the road?
It's incredibly hard without an audience.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the same thing. I mean, especially at my level, the independents rely on people. If people don't show up, no one's getting paid. So you really don't have that ability to make money wrestling without people there. So, my game has changed. I'm basically doing everything I can online, not wrestling, just putting out videos and doing fun stuff, because this is where everyone is right now.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, it's just not the same, which is of course really sad. And you want it to go back to the same, which it will at some point, but no one quite knows when. So you go, well, what's different? What can we do? And I'm so happy, as bad as it is, as bad timing as this is for the documentary, because we were supposed to premiere at South by Southwest, and then we were going to wrestle at South by Southwest at the after party, like a whole cool thing. All that got canceled. All the wrestling, all the comedy gets canceled. And you're like, well, but at least this movie and this story is a really cool way for wrestling fans to engage with wrestling right now, because they got to see David's story 2 years ago play out in real time.
Yeah.
If they were watching online or they were at a show, they got to see all that. And now they can, this is really like the director's cut of his wrestling run.
Totally. And I mean, I'm kind of curious, because I love just how you're not only talking about sort of the business of pro wrestling, but you're talking about it in a very sort of, I don't want to say stage or theatrical way, but it's almost a cinematic way. And I'm kind of curious, because like you do act, but you're a wrestler. What ultimately got you into the business, but also B, sort of willing to sort of understand the dichotomy between acting and pro wrestling, and also the relationship between them?
I never looked at them differently. I always acted and wrestled, and I saw the same thing in both of them. And I always felt like wrestling could make me a better actor, and acting could make me a better wrestler. They made up for a lot of different parts. However, it takes a lot to break the stigma of wrestling. Both, as you know, in show business, wrestling can be a very dirty word for people. It's hard to rehab your career, as you can see with David through wrestling. And also, people inside wrestling are very reluctant to admit that what they do is show business and acting. They really resent it. And you go, like, how close are you tied to your character that you can't even admit that it's a character? It's very strange. So I really make a point of, let's just keep, pushing the two. And this is the same thing. And I think wrestling wise, my part of the movie is one of the only ones that quote unquote breaks kayfabe.
Right.
And that was a really purposeful choice, because I'm like, this is, and I think it's one of the only times he starts opening up and understanding it. It helped working with him to explain these things in acting terms. It's one of those things where it's like, wrestlers and actors are looking at the same thing, but with different tinted glasses on. And it's one of those things where it's like, take them off, guys. It's the same. We can all have a lot of fun here.
And I mean, I love how, like, sort of kayfabe, the fourth wall, it's like they have, like, they try to be given these sort of holier than thou sort of meanings, but really they are the same thing.
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. I mean, it always kind of baffles me when people go, oh, well, it's wrestling, so, it's fake. And I'm like, yeah, but like a movie is fake. So, like, yeah, it is fake. Like, why don't you understand that it's fake? And it's because wrestling always tries to sell itself on being real for some weird reason. Like, everyone knows it's fake. Everyone knows it's fake for like almost 100 years now. So, like, let's let it go and explore, especially in this time where it seems, nothing matters anymore. Let's at least experiment and enjoy ourselves.
But also understanding the difference that if you get thrown off the top rope through a table, that's you going through a table, and it still hurts.
Right, which is also a little ridiculous in a sense, where you go, maybe we could have made this more fake. Maybe we could do it without actually hurting each other. And, that's often the trick. You really want to make it look as good as possible without harming the person. That's a big thing. But, there's no rehearsal. It's not choreographed in a sense. So the risk is always high.
Now, I mean, I guess that kind of leads into another question. And this is something just from a personal nature. When you're when I've been watching wrestling, like sometimes when you're watching a big spectacular stunt, it's like, oh, that looks so brutal, but then you're wondering how brutal it actually was. And then if you're watching something where nothing happened, it's like, do the spots that don't work hurt more than the spots that work?
I've been hurt by the stupidest little things. And it's so frustrating because with the bigger, dangerous things, you're really bracing yourself and you're really focusing on taking care of yourself. And you go, wow, this is going to hurt. So you can at least prepare for it. Sometimes the worst pain I think I've ever had in wrestling is I hopped up on the apron, and for whatever, I was in a horrible ring, and they had no padding on the apron. So I hopped up, and it was just my shin on just a hard metal. And I went, oh, dear Lord. And you're just like, why did no one think to pad this? It's the little things like that you're just, not prepared for. I always say that wrestling could have really used a rehearsal.
I can absolutely believe that. Now, I mean, I guess my next question is because there's been a history of the celebrity matches in pro wrestling. Some of them have been absolute disasters. Some of them have been pretty passable. And I'm kind of curious from your perspective, seeing how David put in the work, where would you sort of rank him performing sort of on a celebrity scale? I don't want to say on somebody who's making towns and working 4 or 5 nights a week, but on sort of the celebrity scale of people who have actually stepped in the ring.
Well, it's hard because he almost puts himself in another category because he did make towns. And what you see in the documentary, wrestling-wise, is really the tip of the iceberg. And he took bookings with me, and we tagged all over the place in different states and in Canada. And he would show up and I'd be like, where are the documentary people? He's like, oh, I was like, you just want to do this? Like, what is wrong with you? He took this incredibly seriously. So it's hard to put him in the category as like a Mr. T,
Right.
you know, who had those one or two matches. And because of that, David has had some decent matches. I'd say the stuff we did was good. I'd say the stuff he did with Jungle Boy was great. And he's also had some bad matches. Obviously, the stuff he did in WCW, which was barely wrestling.
Yeah.
But, you know, he did other stuff on the indies that was just straight up bad. But that's how you learn. So I don't think it's a reflection on him. It's the reflection on the hit or miss process of becoming a wrestler.
No, totally. And I mean, for you sort of being inspired to want to get into the business, was there sort of one person or one star that you were like, yeah, I like him, I want to do that?
Looking back on it, and it's so weird, when you're a kid, you like people and you hate people. And then when you get older, you realize, oh my God, I really liked hating that person.
Yeah.
So I always gravitated towards the Bobby Heenans and the Rick Rudes and the Mr. Perfects and Roddy Piper, who I ended up working with. We did a pilot together and we did a movie together and we spent a lot of time together. And he's just like, man, he was on really, really another level in terms of bringing his emotions and his reality into the ring.
What's easier, being a heel or a face?
Oh, it's way easier being a heel. I have likability issues. I say, let's not worry about whether these people like me or not. I can definitely make sure that they don't like me. It's a lot easier.
And I mean, I love hearing that answer, because I mean, people who don't understand, or at least have any sort of knowledge of just watching it on TV, assume that being the good guy is probably easier, but everyone to a T always says the opposite.
Well, David's struggle is the struggle of trying to be liked and respected and really trying to be a good guy, because his first swing at bat in WCW failed miserably. And that's incredibly difficult for him. And then he sometimes goes, oh, gee, I wish I could be a bad guy sometimes. But now it's not in him. He's very much a joyful 12-year-old boy. He enjoys wrestling too much to hide it.
Wow, that's delightful, but at the same time, it's like, it's almost I don't want to besmirch him, but I mean, at the same time, it's almost a little sad to see that, because it's one of those things where it's like, if you're gonna try to get respect in a certain level at a certain level in a certain business, you almost have to not care what people think about you.
Absolutely. And I think him being that open and really taking people honestly and at their word and valuing every opinion is incredibly exhausting and can run you around in circles, which he seems to do a lot in the movie. And when I dealt with him, I said, like, we're going to have to do it like this, and like, don't listen to everybody else. We are telling a story. It's our story. And there is a lack of savviness to him doing this. And I remember saying to him, there's an easier way to do this. If you came in with a plan and a goal, and there was an easier way to basically cheat this. And he really took no shortcuts, which was, incredibly hard on him, but also wonderful to capture on film.
Now, I guess just to put a bow on this, because this film really does sort of marry the two worlds together, from your perspective, what is, first off, the best wrestling match that you've ever seen that told the best story that maybe would draw in fans of TV and film to the sport of wrestling?
Oh my, what a lovely question. Sometimes I go, that's the best match I've ever seen. One of my personal favorites is Rick Rude versus Roddy Piper in a steel cage. It's in Madison Square Garden. It was on there. It wasn't a big pay-per-view thing, but you can find it online. And it's the perfect mix of everything wrestling can be. It's flashy stars and it's very funny, but it's also very serious. There's unbelievable timing and rhythm and flow, and they tell a great story. And for me, a lot of times I say to people, if you just see angry men hitting each other, then you're watching bad wrestling.
Yeah.
So anytime I can show them something more than that, I think this is that match is a good smorgasbord, if you will, of everything wrestling has to offer.
Well, you know what? That's a great note to end on. And, you know, thank you again for the time today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much.
Cheers, man, and good luck. I know you're probably not making towns right now, but good luck once everything starts getting back to normal again.
Thank you. I'm just living my life on Zoom right now. This is pretty much
I
it.
think we all are.
I know. I guess we're all along for the same ride. That's good, though.
All right, cheers, man.
Take it easy.
Bye-bye.